Welcome to TaiwanTalks, bringing you a Taiwan perspective on global affairs. I'm Albert Cho. The South Korea and U.S. militaries have concluded their most comprehensive joint exercises in the last 5 years, as they prepare for the largest ever live-fire exercises in June. This is amid North Korea's continued violation of international law with its missile launches and the escalating tensions in the Taiwan Strait. South Korea has highlighted the need to address the threats authoritarian regimes pose to Asian democracies. Joining us are Liou To-hai, National Chengchi University Adjunct Professor of Diplomacy and the College of International Affairs, WTO Studies Center Director, and Stephen Tan, Managing Director of International Policy Advisory Group, Attorney and Managing Director. A very warm welcome to both on the show. Okay. First of all, my question goes to Professor Liu. Could you briefly explain the significance of the South Korea's Soaring Eagle exercise?
Okay. The Soaring Eagle exercise is vital for South Korea to equip swift response capabilities to North Korea's provocations. Why? Because nowadays, when it comes to war, air supremacy is very important. It matters a lot. So that is why South Korea has to pay attention to this. In addition, we also need to know since last May until now, North Korea has done quite a lot, enormous, this kind of missile launching, all kinds of challenge, because they did not like the Yoon Suk-yeol government, because they believe it's a conservative government. They do not view the North Korea positively. To be more specific, hostile. So that is why North Korea has tried to test all kinds of the things. For example, North Korea claimed North Korea has tested underwater nuclear attack drone capable to unleash radioactive tsunami to destroy ports and military facilities in South Korea. They also even tested a missile from a site of a reservoir. So all kinds of the things that North Korea has done. So that has definitely posed an enormous threat to South Korea. So that is why South Korea needs to enhance its air force capability in case North Korea decided to make any risky move.
Right, so I can see the tension between the South and the North is escalating. So, Stephen, so what's President Yoon's stance on North Korea and China so far? Could you kind of analyze them in the same context, North Korea and China?
Right. Obviously, President Yoon of South Korea has taken a much stronger stance than his predecessor. So far, in terms of China, I think President Yoon has iterated and reiterated time and again that to urge China to exercise restraint and to avoid unilateral change of the status quo and the peace and stability of Taiwan Strait, and also repeatedly refer to Taiwan, the issue on the Taiwan Strait, as an international issue, as opposed to what China claims as the domestic or the China issue. Now, in terms of North Korea, I think it's very clear that President Yoon reiterated that, well, it is great to be peaceful, but then you have to build up your multiple deterrents, and you have to work out with your allies to get an assurance and the reassurance in order to deter a possible war for North Korea. So I think South Korea's current stance, both in terms of North Korea and China, has been pretty much in line with the United States and Japan, which I believe is a slight detour or deviation from his predecessor. So if you look at the overall picture geopolitically, I think it's in an alignment, at least among Japan, South Korea, and the United States, both in terms of the issue on the Korean Peninsula and Taiwan Strait.
Well, we know that when it comes to the North Korea's aggression against the South, what's behind the scene was China, right?
Right.
So I think the President Yoon not only needs to work together with Japan, but also he has something to do with the United States assistance.
That's right.
So, so what's his expectation, President Yoon's expectation from the U.S. To help South Korea to counter?
Well, I think the President Yoon of South Korea has been very successfully working out a scheme with the United States in order to have a common interest and consensus. I think previously there is a momentum within South Korea to urge the administration to develop its own nuclear power. And it ended up into what you have seen last month as what we call the Washington Declaration. I think it's a great movement. Allow me to just read some of the paragraphs in the Washington Declaration made by the White House of the United States on April 26. Basically, the core line of this is that the United States' commitment to extend deterrence to South Korea is backed by the full range of U.S. capabilities, including nuclear.
Okay.
Going forward, the United States will further enhance the regular visibility of strategic assets to Korean Peninsula, as evidenced by the upcoming visit of a U.S. nuclear ballistic missile submarine to South Korea, and will expand and deepen coordination between the militaries of the two countries. I think this is, from the South Korea's perspective, this is a victory. In a compromised way, and to the satisfaction, to my understanding, of the people in South Korea, that in case there is a war, there is a nuclear warfare launched by North Korea, the United States will not only commit to use it may use the nuclear power to defend, but also get involved South Korea's Yoon administration. I think in exchange, South Korea agreed not to develop its own nuclear power. I think this assurance and the reassurance, because there has been a mutual defense treaty between South Korea and the United States for 70 years. This reassurance and the new assurance as made by the Washington Declaration on April 26, to my understanding and in my belief, it is a stabilizer of the regional peace and stability, particularly on North Korea and the Korean Peninsula.
Okay, we knew that in terms of the South Korean president's stance on the North Korean issue, it vacillates, right? Sometimes it's more friendly towards North, sometimes more aggressive towards the North. So would you kind of introduce to our international audience that, in the past several presidents, including the current one, what are their stances on the North Korean issue? Yeah.
Surely. South Korea actually has been divided into two different camps. One group is what we just mentioned about conservative government, the current Yang government, and the other group is what's called progressive forces. The big difference, number one, is how to deal with North Korea.
Okay.
So we have already heard about Dr. Tan talk about Yoon Suk-yeol's conservative government policy toward the United States and North Korea. On the other hand, the progressive forces, they tend to view the North Korea as brothers because they believe eventually South Korea will reunited with North Korea to become a united country again. In that case, so they have to engage North Korea. So in the future, once they become reunited, they can reduce the economic cost.
Okay.
So this is and when it comes to its relationship with the two superpowers, China and United States, by and large, both camps believe U.S. is very important, but in different ways. For the conservatives, they believe U.S. is number one because South Korea is the arch enemy. Okay. But for the progressive forces, they tend to have a better relationship with North Korea. This is number one priority, followed by China, and then perhaps United States. Why? Because they want to serve as balancer between the surrounding big powers. And then eventually they can reunited with North Korea.
Okay.
So in that case, you can easily find out most of the time, South Korea actually have been ruled by the conservative government from the Lee Seung-man, Park Geun-hye's father, Park Chung-hee, and then Chun Do-hwan, No Tae-woo, and Lee Myung-ba, and Park Geun-hye, and the current Yoon Suk-yeol. Only 3 presidents belong to the progressive forces.
Okay.
They are Kim Dae-jung, No Moo-hyun, and Moon Jae-in.
Right, that's very clear. Really quick, Professor Liu, you as a Taiwanese scholar, right? What role do you believe that Taiwanese government can contribute or play on this issue regarding the conflict between North and South Korea? Yeah.
Because this is a regional issue, okay? No matter what happened in Korean Peninsula or outside,
right.
We could be affected each other. For example, Korean War, that's a sad example. North Korea decided to invade South Korea, and actually Mao Zedong was ready to attack Taiwan. Okay, so then because of that, North Korea made the first move to attack the South Korea, and then actually we were saved by the Seventh Fleet from the United States. So same thing in the future. Anything happened across the strait, then North Korea could easily take this advantage to attack South Korea. So that means our security is intimately connected with South Korea. So that is why there's a need to enhance our collaboration with our democratic camp countries.
Let's now hear from Jinho Kim on the significance of the South Korea-U.S. military partnership in relation to North Korea. He is a professor at the Department of Political Science and International Relations at the Dankook University. Let's take a look.
Professor Kim, what is the significance of the recent live-fire military exercises conducted in close proximity to the Korean demilitarized zone by the United States and South Korea? Is this exercise more for a show of force or substantive in countering the threat posed by North Korea?
现在我们对朝鲜的一些战略有所变化了。过去的政府呢，就是稍微互相之间呢，就保持联系的方式，要探讨，要把一个朝鲜半岛和平这个环境造成，然后里头把一些有关朝核的问题，双方的信任之下要解决的。但是现在尹锡悦政府呢，现在就改称为朝鲜的这个核问题呢，韩国与美国以及日本加强合作，然后实际上的一些战略上的一个军事上的行动，然后这是遏制或者抵制朝鲜的一个核挑战的一些这个念头啊，这个变化呢，实际上我们都包括有关部门的一些战略的一个合作。实际上我们三八线现在我们说休战线附近的这种合作呢，实际上真的发生战争的时候，韩国如何这对应现在是以守为攻的，过去的话以防御为主，现在就是以朝鲜攻击，我们都就是反攻为主的一些战略合作。
Subsequent to Yoon Suk-yeol's visit to the United States, has there been any discernible alterations in South Korea's position regarding the Taiwan Strait issue, considering the statement made by Yoon Suk-yeol that the Taiwan issue is an international matter, which prompted objections from China?
实际上有关台海的问题啊，韩国这边一讲啊，就是中国大陆马上就反应出来的。当然我们韩国是世界上有一个考虑一个问题，就是台海的问题影响到朝鲜半岛的，特别是韩国的一些安保上的不安因素的话，韩国呢多少为了这个朝鲜半岛上的韩国的一个安全要做一些措施的。但是实际上一个台海的问题呢，因为这个跟朝鲜半岛的环境是不一样的。我们是和平的这种这个国际秩序里头能支援的资源，但是战争类似现在乌克兰战争一样，韩国都不想战争别国的一些纠纷的这种情况来看呢，韩国要重视一个半岛里头韩国的军事安全问题。第二就是东北亚的很多国家通过台海 运输很多物流的，所以运输商有一些这个有问题的话，就是为了东北亚地区，包括整个一个东亚地区的和平稳定，这种价值观上，韩国多少做一些贡献。
North Korea is one of the few remaining totalitarian regimes in the world. Totalitarianism, by definition, is the complete control of people's lives by the government, extending beyond just suppression of political rights. Let's now discuss the fundamentals of totalitarianism and how North Korea is able to impose such on its people. So, Stephen, so how stable is the North Korea's government under the current President Kim Jong-un?
Wow,
in your evaluation?
Well, that's a big question. That's a big question to ask because I think the stability of the politics of North Korea and the stability, the mental and psychological and political stability of the Kim Jong-un administration and he himself and his administration, I think it's a big mystery that the intelligence communities around the world have been searching answer for. On the appearances, it seems to be that Kim Jong-un is still in full control, although the social and the economic problems and concerns within North Korea has caused lots of attention for the rest of the world. It doesn't seem to be an unrest in terms of the political stability and to what extent that he will continue to maintain the full control of North Korea. It doesn't seem to be that way. But then sporadically and from time to time, the launch of the missiles, across the continental Japan and the neighboring waters, doesn't appear to be that Kim is a reasonable leader. So all in all, although we don't have convincing evidence that either his mental state or his psychological status turned unstable, or his control over power within North Korea has caused some problems. But I think it remains to be seen. I think the existence of a communist and totalitarian regime under the Kim family for decades in North Korea is in and out of itself an instability within the region and in the world.
Okay, Professor Liu, so according to our observation, because you're experts, on the peninsula, what approaches has the Kim family, including himself, employed in North Korea during the periods of stability to remain in power? Has to be some kind of, approaches for him to reunite its own people.
Oh, yes. For North Korea now, it has gone through the third generation. So we need to know each top leader has different approach according to their situation. For example, when Kim Il-sung arrived on North Korea, he was only in the 30s. He was not really powerful and a lot of the rivals. So he had to accommodate his rivals. So he did not consolidate his power until the 1960s, taking advantage of what's so-called Kimism, because he emphasized North Korea has to rely on its own nationalism. What does that mean? That means no matter you use chopsticks or forks, you have to eat into your mouth. So that is why North Korea needs to pragmatically take advantage of the Marxism-Leninism. That means Marxism-Leninism has to accommodate to North Korea's unique condition. So that's nationalism. So he was able to consolidate his power through his rules, and then followed by his son Kim Jong-il. Kim Jong-il, he was a junior, and he had actually no military background. So that's why he believed he had to rely on military support. So that is why he took what's called pro-military stance or policy, 先军政治. So in that case, he was able to consolidate power with the special, privilege to the military. So when it comes to his son, Kim Jong-un, totally different situation. When Kim Jong-un came to power, he was even younger, less than 30 years.
Yeah.
So he faced the challenge from the presumptuous generals. So that is why when he became the top leader, he quickly emphasized the importance of party. Party controlled the military, and then once he consolidated his party's position, and then he purged the top leader, military leader, Lee Yong-hao, and then killed his uncle, Chang Seng-tae, for treason. So that's how he consolidated his power. But nowadays, he has tried to show he is a younger generation. He lead North Korea to a different way. So he tried to be very friendly to young people in order to consolidate his
Do
power.
you think that there's a chance for him to lead North Korea in an open direction in the future, such as like Deng Xiaoping in the 1980s in China, at least from his mindset? Do you think any kind of possibility out there?
I will say it depends on North Korea's relations with outside world. So far, North Korea has been isolated by the outside world. So North Korea does not have a chance to do so. Last time North Korea, through the help of the Moon Jae-in, he was able to have the summit with Donald Trump. His goal was to establish formal diplomatic relations with the United States.
Right.
So in that case, North Korea would have balanced between the two superpowers.
Okay.
In that case, North Korea might take a little bit open-minded when it comes to the economic reform.
That's very interesting. So, Stephen, so will diplomacy works in this scenario, effective in changing North Korea's provocative behavior, according to your perspective?
I mean, to me, a vacuum diplomacy in itself, without coupling other things, would never be a good recipe to solve a problem of this magnitude and scale. Former President Moon of South Korea and former President Trump of the United States, they've been trying to do the pure personal diplomacy in order to try to resolve the problem or try to mitigate the issues of concern in Peninsula, in Korean Peninsula. And guess what? It didn't work out well. I think diplomacy itself needs to be coupled with multiple deterrents and assurance and reassurance and alliance among the allies. And that might be a recipe in totality. And that's what I believe in this region the major countries involved have been doing. And that does not just apply to the Korean Peninsula, but also Taiwan Strait. Peace talk, in and out of itself, out of a vacuum, would never work. You would have to have deterrence coupled with alliance, and then the mutual assurances, and then with some skillful and seasoned diplomacy. So I never believed that the pure personal relationship and the pure diplomacy in vacuum will be able to solve the problem of this complexity.
Right. Yeah, we will come back to the Taiwan Strait in a second. But now let's hear from Yang Chien-hao on the current state of Seoul's foreign relations. He's a Taiwanese correspondent based in South Korea and a founder of KORNEWS.
Based on your first-hand insight, what are aspects or development deserving attention in the recent U.S.-South Korea military exercise?
Well, this is the first joint massive fire live drill after 6 years and the large scale ever, and clearly showing that the alliance and the tight military cooperation is back after the conservative Yoon Suk-yeol conservative President Yoon Suk-yeol takes office. And during the drill, advanced weapons such as the Korean domestic, those weapons were all being shown and put into the drill, and it simulates that North Korea launches attacks and South Korea, along with the U.S. Army, wipe out the enemy. And the drill can be seen as an important part of the extended deterrence, which means America and the United States provide military support and also trying to strengthen the self-defense power of South Korea itself, making the cost of attacks from North Korea become more harsh and make them dare not to do it.
So in South Korea, what is the public's reaction to the U.S.-South Korea military exercise this time? Is there a sense of tension in domestic politics?
Indeed, the military exercise or drills are always not big issues here. People here don't care about it that much. But since Russia invades Ukraine in the beginning of last year, and seeing the tensions between the Taiwan Straits, the threat from China is getting bigger and bigger. Indeed, there are more and more people in South Korea. They are worrying that if China invades Taiwan, then North Korea might also take actions simultaneously, making the United States unable to handle. So that's why President Yoon is trying to seek more cooperate with the United States more than the former President Moon Jae-in.
So moving on to our third question, how has South Korea's foreign policy under President Yoon Suk-yeol differed from the previous Moon administration? Is there a noticeable difference regarding engagement with the U.S.?
As you can see in the drill, during the drill, the concept of peace through strength, it was being mentioned for many times during the drill. And if you look back, the former progressive President Moon Jae-in, in his term, South Korea tried to build up an environment, trying to push North Korea back to the negotiate by lowering or reducing its enmity toward the Pyongyang authority. But now, after President Yoon takes office, Seoul is now regarding Pyongyang as a rule more close to a troublemaker and have decided not to give way to Pyongyang anymore. Therefore, in order to maintain the peaceful and stable order in this area, strengthening the military power and protection itself will be placed in the first. That's indeed a very big major shift. You can see from President Moon to now President Yoon's term.
Xi Jinping's consolidation of power in China can be seen as a gradual process through anti-corruption on campaigns, centralization of authority, ideological control, and removal of term limits. This has led to a centralized one-man rule in China, boosting Xi's influence and authority. So now let's talk about China. So Stephen, we just talked about the Taiwan Strait. So is calling China a communist country still relevant? Because some scholars will argue that this is only exists in name, communist China, because what it is happening in China is really is authoritarian, which is on the right-wing side. What's your take on this?
Well, no, I mean China is under CCP's rule. So CCP stands for Chinese Communist Party. So CCP regime has a full control right now, politically, socially, and economically over China. So calling China a communist country remains to be absolutely correct. Either call it totalitarianism or authoritarianism or autocracy, but whatever name you put it on, that is still a communist China. No change. I mean, it has some aspect of the market economy, but again, if you look at how this country is functioned and it's governed by the administration, it's still totally a CCP or a communist China. No change, and it might be even getting worse.
Okay, so. Professor Liu, so with President Xi's extended term in power, does this mark a significant departure from China's previous one-party oligarchical rule to a kind of new stage one-man authoritarian regime? Your analysis of this?
I think this is not the first time, because Mao Zedong's period, everybody knows
one man
controlled everything, right? Xi actually could not, so far, still cannot compete with Mao Zedong. So that is why he continued to consolidate his power in order to make sure his leadership is working. So I think that's the Chinese way, since it's controlled by the CCP, and who's on the top of the CCP, who's going to dominate the China. But of course, that is also very risky. You don't know who is the next successor will be very successful or not. You never know. In particular, if Xi Jinping has done very good, in that case, for a long time, he hasn't nurtured the successor. In that case, that could be a disaster for the future. So that is why Xi Jinping's health is relevant. See whether he can stay healthy and control the power for longer period, or his health is not good. In that case, power struggle will definitely start.
He's now in his 70s, right? It's going to be like 80 really soon. So if he's like pretty lengthy in his life enough, maybe at the best 10 years, we really have to see the next president of China. Otherwise, like what I said, will be a crisis in this kind of ruling management, so to speak. So what's your take on this?
Well, I think if you look at it in the long-term horizon, give and take a decade or more, I think this is going to be probably the biggest potential crisis in China or in the governance of China. And if this is the biggest crisis in China or the governance of China, and it's going to be the biggest crisis, or at least one of them for the whole world. Now, obviously, Xi doesn't have a succession plan, at least not right now. Going forward in the next 5 years, whether or not he will have one or have some remains to be seen. I agree fully with Professor Liu that in the next couple of years, the performance of Xi and CCP and the conditions in totality of China is going to be a dictating factor or factors going forward in terms of the stability of China and whether or not she will have a smooth power transition to the next generation leadership. So far, we haven't seen any. And so far, China doesn't seem to have this upward trends, both in terms of political succession and also in terms of how to run a modern society and a modern or postmodern nation. So I think I join the rest of the world observers in worrying about in the long-term horizon the future of China, so as to cause some potential biggest issue of concern in the world.
Well, I mean, if based on both of your observation, would it be correct to say that it's kind of hopeless for us to see a new China maybe after Xi to return back to this reform and open kind of system like what we saw a bit in the 90s? Professor Liu, you first, please.
For this moment, China continue to emphasize that the door is open. They would like to engage others. But now we have already seen China started to take advantage of the national security reason to detect or inspect foreign investors. So in that case, so it's kind of very controversial. You don't know whether China is really going to open as what we believe the Western style or not. So Wall Street people, they're wondering which one is true, right?
Maybe in their definition, they think that they're open already, but
yeah,
still.
that's perhaps China's definition.
Okay, Stephen. Yeah.
Well, I think it's hard to imagine that China will be back to the quote-unquote good old days under, let's say, Hu Jintao or under Jiang Zemin in terms of opening up itself to the international community. Right. I think it would take. I think it would take at least a big U-turn or 180 degree, but we don't see any signals of that in the foreseeable future. Now, whether or not, well, China will argue that no, we're more than welcome the foreign investments. We try to attract, promote a trade and attract investments, so on and so forth. But it looks like China is doing that for a utility or from convenience purposes. What does that mean? I mean, China would need to have international participation and foreign capital. But if we look at the totality of the social control and the promoting 300% of the Xi's leadership, which is to me is close enough to the Maoism back then. And then you will see that it's literally not possible to have or to enjoy an open society with free speech, with human rights, and even with the full-fledged foreign investment from the international community. So I think this would be the biggest challenge in China or for China to continue to do what he claims to do, which is this good old days, the same old, but people are watching this and people are observing and monitoring this, and people don't see that China is an open society and it's open up to international community and trying to go back to what Deng Xiaoping and Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao has been doing. So it remains to be seen, but right now I'm not optimistic about this.
We hear from Eelco Vander Maat on expanding authoritarianism in Asia. He's an assistant professor at the Leiden University Institute for History. Let's take a look.
In the case of China, what are the constraints faced by authoritarian leaders, and how have these constraints changed over time, potentially impacting their behaviors?
If we're talking about China, one of the things that we have seen over the last 2 decades is an increasingly personalization, right? Xi Jinping has been in power and has been increasing his power over time. And in doing so, he changed some of the norms that existed, that were put in place under Deng. Norms that were actually quite good in regulating elite rivalry. Why? Because there was the norm that if you were to be thrown out or sort of retired or purged from the Communist Party, you would at least not be imprisoned and you could live your life in relative peace. So they tried to make elite rivalry less, deadly, the stakes a bit lower. Now, Xi, perhaps by incidents or by his behavior, he has broken those norms, right? Xi has taken control, has taken out and imprisoned his rivals, and he is now more and more alone. And I think he's one of the more powerful individuals since Deng. Now, the problem is that with that power also comes this great insecurity, right? As he gets more powerful, he will try to get more power. This is not because authoritarian leaders are very power hungry, but they have certain incentives that as they get more powerful, they become more dangerous to the people around them. They are more likely to challenge them. Therefore, they seek more power, and that goes on and goes on until you get a Xi, a Putin, a Mugabe. One particular challenge that Xi faces would be retirement, right? Xi is now nearing 70. Putin became 70 last year, and that creates a problem, right? They have full control. They are the central actor. However, people around them will know that, in 20 years, they'll be gone. Perhaps in 10 years, they'll be gone. And if they're unlucky, they might be gone in 5 years, right? And so people start planning to, okay, what is next? What would my position be after Xi or Putin or Lukashenko is no longer there? And that creates tensions. Some of these tensions might very well be very visible in Russia's conflict in Ukraine, whereby the different factions within the Russian state are sometimes openly fighting each other. What Xi or Putin will do, it's not quite clear. Xi has still the institutional structure of the Communist Party, and so he might be able to retire, right? And if he's able to retire, his position would be much better. Now, if he were to cling to power like Putin does, Lukashenko does, or Mugabe did, then it would be much harder for him. The goal then is to stay in power until you die. because that will keep you safe. In that period where you are getting older and people are starting to change their behavior, this is when states can act more irrationally.
According to Freedom House's Freedom Scores in the World 2021 reports, Taiwan achieved a remarkable score of 93 out of 100, indicating its robust political freedom and civil liberties. However, there are valid concerns regarding potential threats to Taiwan's democracy, largely influenced by external pressures, particularly from China. It is disconcerting that some individuals in Taiwan may be drawn to the appealing nature of Chinese authoritarian regime, posing a risk of democratic regression on the island. So, Stephen, first goes to you. Is democracy a broad consensus in Taiwan? Yeah, this is kind of a big question, but yeah, I think you can take on this.
I think the short answer is yes. I think generations and generations in Taiwan, we've enjoyed the hard-earned democracy here. Now we're a full democracy. Understandably, democracies might go back, to authoritarianism or even totalitarianism. So we're upholding the democracy. But Albert, if you ask me, if democracy is the common value that people cherish and uphold, I would say yes. There might be a small minority, very, very small minority of the population in Taiwan who might think back like, well, China has the ultimate totalitarian or authoritarian autocratic efficiency. It can do whatever they want to do, by the government and build the railroads and this and that within a few weeks or months, and we're in full democracy and things get stuck. But I would say that it's a very, very small minority here in Taiwan. What's problematic, it's not that people have second doubt on the value and virtue of democracy in Taiwan. What's problematic is that if we don't do well, if we don't have a common ground of the sense of community to uphold the democracy, democracy will be at risk. You see the misinformation and disinformation and cognitive warfare launched by China along with, sort of the collaborators locally, right before the election or during, after the election, throughout the years, and that in it itself will put our democracy at risk. So if we're not conscious enough to uphold and protect our hard-earned democracy for decades, it will be in jeopardy. And if that's the case, that would be a big loss, not just to Taiwan, but to the rest of the world.
Right. Professor Liu, we know that democracy is never perfect, right? It involves noise and conflict, as we already see in the 2016 and 2020 presidential election in the United States. So in Taiwan, it's the same case that maybe some people would argue that, this sort of chaotic situation after and in our election, and we might admire the way maybe not even Chinese society enjoys, maybe, for example, Singapore there. So what's the take on this? Do you see any kind of voices in Taiwan that really in favor of this anti-democratic kind of ruling or governance there?
I think the majority of people enjoy the life here. But the thing is whether we can maintain this system functioning in a right way. This is very important.
Okay.
So nowadays, not Taiwan. Taiwan is not alone. United States, France, Germany, the same problem.
Right,
Very polarized society. People are very divided.
True.
So basically, they don't know or how to get along with each other. So actually, a lot of things from democracy, they are very valuable. For example, respect. People need to respect each other.
Right.
And then compromise. You have to compromise. If everybody only talk about the individual interest, party interest, or whatever, in that case, you don't have a sense of whole society. Right. The maintaining of democratic country, this is the most important one. In that case, we have to compromise. We have to respect each other. We have to get the compromise, and then we have a common goal, a common approach. This is something we need to work out.
All right, great. Stephen, even though you talk about there's only a small segment of population in favor of the authoritarianism, but let's kind of change our mindset a bit. Could you help us to share the criticism of some authoritarian people may have for the U.S. and also its democracy?
Well, I think for the past few years, there are people in Taiwan, even some of the social leaders, opinion leaders, when they're looking at what's going on in the United States, there has been some criticism on the functionalities of the democracies, particularly federal democracies in the United States, as evidenced by a number of incidents, including the January 6th and 2021, and all that. But I would say that democracy itself has a very strong resilience, and particularly for centuries of democracy in the United States, the strong federalism and the resilience of the democracy and the constitutionality will give a lot of people lots of faith that people around the world, including Taiwanese here, and Americans in the United States will continue to uphold the democracies around the world. So I would say that skepticism or the criticism on the American democracies, although I would say that to a certain extent, there is a bit of virtue, but if you look at the overall picture, I would still say that the resiliencies in and out of itself of the democracies in the world will continue to put it through no matter what. And it's not the best recipe, but at least it's the most reasonable and it's the most sustainable system to run, to govern the nations in the whole world.
In this episode, our speakers provided insights into South Korea's military exercises, focusing on the threats from North Korea and potentially China. We also explored growing totalitarianism in both North Korea and China, highlighting the implication for everyday citizens, as well as the strengths and weaknesses of a democracy. We invite you to share your thoughts and comments on our YouTube channel, and remember to subscribe to the future updates. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.